Alrighty, hello everybody, and welcome to something that gets requested all the dang time, but somehow I still haven't done in several years, and that would be a tier list for the Tactics Ogre. Now, we'll be starting off with the PSP remake. I plan to go through and do this for every one of the games, including the mods, so, you know, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get this started. Now, personally, I'm a fan of just, like, pretty much if it works, it works. Who cares if it's optimal? So, do a hell of a lot of challenge runs. So, one that I see constantly come up at the bottom end of a lot of folks' opinions that personally I think is pretty dang awesome would be Warriors. Now, technically speaking, I think they're an A tier. Now, why is that? Well, first of all, one thing that's a little bit of a hidden mechanic that doesn't tend to come up very often is how it comes to defense from different weapon skills. Now, if you didn't know, anytime that you equip any skill, it basically will give you a bonus anytime that skill particularly affects you. So, for example, say Warrior has two-handers there, and, you know, sure, it makes them good at two-handers, it also makes them more resistant to two-handers. Now, the big thing with Warriors there is, A, they've got some really good skills, including a guaranteed hit move. They've basically got the ability to attack twice, potentially giving them the best DPS, barring unique characters. Like, it's pretty awesome. True, their base stats aren't amazing, but as an overall class, like, you don't use them for growths. Like, once you have a character that's already good, or even at least average, or hell, in some cases I've literally just kept them as a warrior the entire game, they still were pretty dang good, because Double Strike is awesome. So yeah, just the fact that they can essentially resist any type of physical damage for the most part. They can't resist, like, two-handed katanas or spears or, say, blowguns or something, but who cares? If you need something that's versatile, that'll do anything you need it to, Warriors right there. Now, next up, next thing that you end up seeing recruited, and the one thing that's probably the most obvious on the list, Archers. So, I'm pretty sure everyone's well aware of the fact that Matsuno apparently has the world's biggest hard-on for Archers. They are easily the most busted class in the game as far as a lot of things go. As far as their scaling and everything else, it's absolutely insane. They actually have a bunch of hidden bonuses, so to speak. Actually, a few weapons get hidden bonuses that, well, as the name implies, are a bit hidden. So, specifically, daggers and bows are going to be the main ones that stick out. One-handed katanas get them as well, and I believe a couple of others. But basically, they will scale unusually well. So this basically means that at the end of the game, when everybody else is looking around just trying to hopefully deal any damage whatsoever, Archers are there with their dang rocket launchers disguised as longbows. I've literally had a case where there was a warrior with the Lombardia who had been doing pretty well the whole time. He's there with his double hit. He ends up critting for like a 20 plus a 40, and it's like, oh crap, this guy actually managed to hurt an endgame golem. That's something. Meanwhile, the archers in the back row are easily shooting 480s on the same unit, and they've been around for the same training, doing the same kind of stuff. So yeah, they get beyond insane. Their double shot gets even more insane. They've got a guaranteed hit move, which I actually forgot to mention that for when it comes to the warriors there, they actually have a very similar setup to archers. In which, yeah, they have an AoE guaranteed hit, and as well as a guaranteed hit plus crit. For those that didn't know, for anything that has a secondary effect on it, so for example, say you take the dagger that has Envenom on it, you stick that on a warrior, you give them Mighty Strike, and suddenly, or actually I believe it was like Tremendous Impact or something. Whatever, the guaranteed hit move. I always get confused between Vanilla and One Vision. You know what move I mean. But they end up, they have a guaranteed chance to hit that secondary effect. Use that as you will, abuse that as you will. Alright, so anyway, yeah, that's no surprise. Archers are absolutely insane. Alright, next on the list, let's go ahead and go with, why am I not seeing Knights on here? I know there's a Knight. Here's Knight, another easy A tier here, just because they've got their healing, they're functionally invulnerable for a whole long part of the game. I mean, they've got one move that actually removes 90% of all damage coming to them, regardless of type. They can go and tank damage for everybody else. As mentioned earlier, they can heal as well. True, they're slow as hell. That's the only thing that stops them from being an S tier, but yeah, no, they're solid, they're reliable, they're dull, but it is what it is. Next up, we have Terronites. Now, where's this happy thing gonna go? Well, that's a pretty solid E tier. I normally would think to put it in F tier because this unfortunate thing is absolutely abused, but there's one that's a little bit worse. So they've got the best debuff in the game, is the thing. So Fear is one of these things that's typically not very easy to land in a lot of cases, but it has the unique effect of actually raising... Well, when it comes to attacks from that particular unit, their defense threshold as well as their attack threshold are reduced. Now, normally, the way that the calculation works is when somebody swings, like let's say their weapon does 100 damage, they've got strengthened for 20%, they've got like a 15% bonus on the weapon itself, and the thing they're attacking has an armor of 100. So, they're not really getting a whole lot out of it. Say the thing has an armor of 20, suddenly they're getting 20, plus that 15%, plus that 20%, ends up scaling up a pretty decent amount. So the more it gets through armor, the more ends up scaling up. That's why you see that massive, just like, if you've ever seen a thing where you have like a tank shell firing against a wall, and like a high explosive shell, and you see like it hits, or like an armor piercing shell, I suppose. Like it hits and then it blows out the other side. That's more or less how the damage works in this game. So Fear is the one thing in the game that can actually move that threshold in the middle of a fight. Normally it's just a weapon attack, weapon defense that ends up, or armor defense that ends up mattering as far as that goes. Tends to be why anything with a shield is absolutely amazing in the endgame. But yeah, in general, just one-handed stuff tends to do a lot better, which is pretty unfortunate for Terronites because they also specialize in two-handed weapons. So they've got that amazing debuff, but yeah, their armor options are decent, but they don't get access to shields, they don't get access to many one-handed options. Their overall gimmick with their spellcasting and everything is pretty worthless for a large chunk of the game because their actual casting stats suck. So if you raise them as a caster, okay, they might be somewhat decent, but then they'll be lacking on the physical end. If you've raised them as a physical fighter, they might be somewhat okay with landing their debuffs, but their spellcasting is pretty much worthless to you. It's basically there if they've got nothing better to do, and in most cases, they're usually just better off twiddling their thumbs because they've got maybe a 1% chance to hit anything. There's some exceptions, like for example, TP Leech seems to work unusually well. In which they can take TP from another unit, potentially disabling them for a little while and allowing them to maybe get a finisher off sooner. So they're mostly like a fear and finisher spammer with relatively awful defense. It's very odd how they balance them. But if you're looking for a unit that potentially does everything the Terronite does better, that would be the Cyclops. You don't have to train them in any particular weapon skills, they only have to train Og Dark and Anatomy. Their only limitation is the fact that they can't use items. Well, they can use basic ones. They can't use field alchemy. So, you know, see that as you will. So they're functionally everything that the Terronite does, but they're faster. I probably should have mentioned that for the Terronite. In fact, I'm almost tempted. Like, if it wasn't for the fact that they had two different ways to inflict guaranteed fear, they would be F tier. They're almost unforgivably bad, but they've got some very... Like, if they weren't so quirky and fun to use, then, you know... now I kind of want to move them up a little bit. We'll just... whatever. You get to be in D tier because you're fun to use at any rate. But yeah, in B tier, definitely the Cyclops. They just do everything the Terronite does, but better. They technically have access to a lot of elemental options as well, and I believe they actually get access to Apocrypha, weirdly enough. So there's that. Alright, next up... This one might be arguable, because I personally like using them, but Clerics. Yeah, F tier on that one. Now you might be saying, why? They're the main healer! Yes, this is true. However, they're outclassed in every way with items. In fact, a lot of guides out there specifically say, hey, if you're using a Cleric, just give them items. if you really want to use a Cleric. But if you need to use their specific moveset, you've got Fairies for that. Which, by the way, Fairies... another A tier, but we'll talk about them in just a second. So when it comes to Clerics themselves, though, they're relatively fast, but their defense is awful. They've got a move that lets them purge themselves of all debuffs. That's nice. They can't use it on other units. That's actually something that One Vision corrected. The fact that Mother's Blessing and Mother's Mercy are so similarly named, I guarantee everyone out there has potentially mixed those up at some point and gotten really pissed off about it. They've got no offense to speak of whatsoever. They basically got shots, maybe. Like, for maybe 1 or 2 chapters in the game, they can use shots to do almost damage. So they're just generally kind of awful. As far as actually removing debuffs, Rune Fencers will do that job better. Not to mention they can do it a lot more effectively. because stuff like ease is fairly expensive to use, and, well, they are not really going to have access to conserve MP or anything like that, so yeah, solid F tier in my book. You might be saying Exorcism. Yes, anyone can use Exorcism scrolls. They're cheap. There's no reason to not just do it that way. Anyway, moving on. So, familiars. Like with the Cyclops and the Terronite, the familiar does a lot of what the cleric does, just better. A, they're way faster. B, they get decent defensive options for some reason. C, they actually have access to weapons, which you might be saying cudgels. I mean, yeah, if you're going for Aug Light and you get like a Lippel staff later in the game, congratulations, by that point you've basically beaten the game already. But yeah, so they've got access to many of the same abilities. They've still got offensive moves. They have a move that can basically disable in many ways. Like, you've got Virtuous Stance and things like that. They can just basically disable several units at once. They're a really solid unit overall. So, personally, solid A tier there. But yeah, going down that train of weird healer units, actually. We'll just go ahead and put... where is it here? We'll put Princess here, I'd say, and probably also A tier. They're pretty alright as far as casting goes. They're basically a human familiar in a lot of cases, except they've got access to some decent defensive options, as well as the fact that they're just generally going to have higher stats because unique characters. And on that same note, we'll have Dark Priest. Now, this one I'm sure might piss some people off, which, by the way, yes, that's the wrong picture. I don't care. They're the priest with sunglasses. They are the Dark Priest. So here's the thing. So they get access to a lot of dark abilities and whatever else. They lose out on the healing stuff that they're pretty much already spec'd out for when you get them. I mean, their melee options are going to suck. Their actual casting options are weirdly limited for some reason. Like, their actual available spell pool is just bizarre. So they've got good stats, but sucky spells to use them with. So I guess if you're using a bunch of scrolls with them, that would work. Their special abilities are just strange, like a close-range Envenom move. Like, it's just weird. I mean, I personally like it in terms of just being a quirky class, but I don't know. They're really difficult to get a hold of, on top of that. I mean, honestly, if it wasn't for the high stats, they'd easily be an F tier. But yeah, no, not a fan of that one. I know some people like it. No thank you. Alright, so next up on the list, getting away from healers a little bit, which actually one thing I probably should mention, a weird little quirk with the Princess up here. They actually do have access to a lot of melee abilities if you convert them over from Warrior. I'm not sure why you'd have her as Warrior. I believe it was probably just like a flavor thing for the SNES version or some such. But yeah, there's a lot of melee options that she can get if you want to have those. So there's that. Alright, so next up here we got Berserkers. Another A tier. They're one of the few that can boost their actual attack score, which lets you deal absurd amounts of damage. Like, I remember I was running a fist build a while ago with one of them that was just... You basically just push the death button on anything. For some reason, their defense, despite the fact that they say that their defense is awful, their defense is actually pretty decent, not to mention they have a move that allows them to spread their damage over to other nearby units, functionally making them invincible for a little while. So a very solid unit. I probably would put them into S tier if... well, come to think of it, why don't I put them in S tier? They are pretty dang good. It's just... I don't know. They don't feel broken. They still feel balanced, you know? But, I suppose if we're gonna talk about completely busted units, then we should talk about our next S tier, which is Ninjas. Now, the deal with Ninjas is similar to the Archer. They've got potentially two different weapon options that are completely broken. They can actually even run two of them at once, which is pretty fun. And on top of that, a bit like the Berserker, they have an ability that lets them just... well, ignore damage. So their defensive move that they get. The thing is, it's not necessarily that it makes them immune to damage or anything. The weird thing that it does, it makes them immune by the fact that they suddenly become invisible in the crowd. As soon as they boost their defense by 50%, nobody's targeting them anymore. They're not an interesting target to the AI, it just gives up at that point. So you can more or less sneak them behind anywhere. I feel like they probably should have just called it a stealth move or something. Like, just said stealth instead of steel stance. Funnily enough, that ability got moved to Swordmasters in the One Vision mod, but we'll get to that later. I know we keep wandering over to it, but we'll get there. So yeah, they're interesting. They're interesting, but they're very overpowered once you get katanas going. And about your first 3 ranks, you usually won't see very much, but rank 4 or above, they're like a whirlwind of death at that point. They're basically your best frontline DPS. Like, I feel like warriors are the balanced version of what ninjas were. Not to mention, if you train them as a caster before, their casting abilities are insane. They're one of these ones that will do only 1 damage until suddenly they do like 400. So, very, very potentially high-scaling moves. They've got 2 different versions. If you get access to the tier 2s, they hurt plenty. And alright, I don't think that needs any particular mention in terms of being insane. Now, next up, let's see, who do we want to go with here? I feel like we need another, like, mid-tier unit right here, so I think we'll go for Hoplites. Now, they're a solid C in my book, because they're specifically a defense-orientated lizard build. There's nothing flashy about them. They don't have anything that's inherently busted. They've got 1 move that lets them ignore 1 type of physical damage. They're one of the few that actually specialize in spears, interestingly enough, which automatically makes me want to put them in B tier, but they're so dang average that I gotta put them in C. I mean, they're just somewhat tanky, and they have spears. That's their whole shtick there. They've got a few other potentially interesting action moves as well, but again, very average. Which actually, while we're on the subject of lizards, if you want a more interesting version of that, we've got Juggernauts. So they're basically a high-mobility tank with a good amount of different offensive moves. They can get rid of setup moves, so that's basically anything with a star on it. They can potentially weaken enemies with that same move. They've got a bind chance move. Both of these 2 guys actually have a potential binding move. Or binding and shackling, sorry. It starts off at, I think it's like 20% or so, and then it just kind of scales up. They're pretty fun. They're fun to play around with. You usually will only have maybe 1 or 2 per team, and they're just kind of there as your token lizard guy. But yeah. So, next up, speaking of lizard-related things, I guess we'll go with Dragoon. Now, like, this is weird, because when I was doing a run a little while ago, I was doing a solo. The Dragoon was the one that I found to be the best class for that particular thing. Now, why? They don't have anything particularly special about them. I mean, they've got access to interesting stuff, and that's probably about their main thing there. Like most Beast units, you don't really need Beast Slayer to kill them. Dragon Slayer you can get on any class in the game, almost. If you didn't know, if you put 3 types of dragon items on anybody, they automatically get Dragon Slayer. So they're kind of an average class. They've got defenses similar to the Terronite. Their overall offensive options are pretty similar to the Hoplite. But that's the thing. They've got 2 moves that let them, with almost certainty, kill off any beast or dragon units. It is weird to specifically have them on the team for that reason. But, you know, they're fairly average across the board. I'd say just the fact that you kind of need them in some particular fights, I feel like they kind of deserve the B tier. I personally really love the way that they've always been designed. I know it's kind of a cheap reason to put them up there. But yeah, specifically their access. They're the only ones that can put together some of the sets in the game. Like, for example, when I wanted to do that solo, I wanted to go for a dark build that essentially had the maximum amount of augment darkness available, while also still having pretty decent armor. And sure enough, they were the only class that was able to do it. The Lord, which we'll get to later, has some bizarre limitations to it. But okay. Moving on here. One that's kind of right next to these guys. I was tempted to put them in C tier, actually. But the Rune Fencer, or Valkyrie, it's an odd duck. So it's got Conserve MP, it's got HP Infusion. Basically what this means is in the end game, when you have some expensive support abilities, for example, Ease or Boon of Swiftness or whatever else, they can use them for free. This basically means that they can alternate between, like, they run up, attack something, build up some TP, take some counter hits, build up some more TP, use them for just both of their HP infusion and free MP there. They can actually use both at the same time to some degree, as in they can set up a free MP use while also saving some TP to be able to convert to health. They're a very versatile unit, but you gotta know what you're doing with them. So if you're just kind of using them as a generalist all the time without any specialties, they're gonna have a bad time. If you try to use them with any element other than Divine, you're also gonna have a bad time. I don't even know why they gave them access to other stuff other than, like, flavor, or because they could do that for the rest of the series, or why on earth they decided to give them so many Divine abilities. But on everything else, they've got some missile abilities and some AoE abilities and some basic support spells. On Divine, they're like, oh, would you like to be able to be a Time Mage, a healer, like a just friggin' Dispeller? Why not? You can just do everything now. Oh yeah, you're a summoner too. Like, it's very odd. It's very odd why they gave so much to Divine there, but either way, fun class to play around with, very versatile. Probably go for sword and board rather than spears. Quite simply, they need the defense. Their defense is pretty subpar, but easily one of my favorite classes, even if their stats aren't the most amazing. Probably the most fun and just best generalist in the game. Alright, now, in terms of disappointments, next up, we've got Divine Knights. Yes, we're kind of skipping some time frames here, because I just keep seeing that face staring up from this list of different pictures here, and I keep thinking, man, you are about 1 inch away from where you need to be in that F tier. So why F tier? They're people that can fly, right? Yes. Yes, they can fly. They can also disappoint very badly, because the amount of effort you have to go through to get one of these SOBs is ridiculous. You have to take your dude, like, assuming you're taking one of your existing units, which is the only reason you should ever possibly go this route. Like, if you're going to put this much time into a class, they better be somebody that's already somewhat trained. So you go, you take your existing unit, you knock him unconscious, you turn him into a zombie, you take him down to the Palace of the Dead, you get a particular item, you take that item, and then you rot all their flesh off. Then you take another item, you bring him over to the Floating Ruins, you bring him to the 3rd floor of that, you go ahead and slam a friggin' bloody cross in their eye, and then they turn into an Angel Knight. Congratulations, you've just spent 4 hours upgrading one unit's class. Now, that said, yeah, their stats are still pretty average. Their abilities are really nothing terribly special. They're nothing anybody else can't really do. Most of their songs got pretty nerfed from the whole rest of the series, so really their main thing is just they can fly. And yeah, if you ever change them out of that class, which you actually can do now for some reason, well, then congratulations, I suppose. You just wasted a whole lot of time for a fairly subpar class. Yeah, their gear is limited. Their just everything about them is pretty disappointing. So solid F tier in my book. I like, even when I went and cheated them in, I just really didn't care to use them. They just weren't very good. All right. So next up, we need another S tier. Now, who was it here that was going on the S tier? Oh yeah, that one. That one should be fairly obvious. You know who it is. The Knight Commander. No question there. Like, as soon as you recruit her, she's more than likely going to be the best unit in your team. If you end up changing her over, or if you end up, say, like, going back to New Game Plus, you end up getting more Templar marks. You end up converting her to a ninja for a little bit, getting double attack on her, and then going back with the dual ice blades. Yeah, she can one-shot the boss, no problem. The end boss of the game, I mean. Like, she can easily just dominate anything. It's kind of ridiculous. The most I've seen her do is like 1,200 frickin' damage. Which, by the way, that was with double attack. That was like 650. I guess 1,300 then. But yeah, it was it was a little bit beyond nuts. So she comes in with Og Dark, or Og Ice. She comes in with a bunch of good skills. She basically gets access to everything that the Dragoon, Hoplite, as well as Matriarch or Patriarch get. She's completely busted, quite frankly. There's only one of her, so at least there's that. Alright, so, Speaking of Matriarchs and Patriarchs, we got one of them over here, and once again, I kind of feel like they're a C tier. They've got some okay casting abilities, they've got a bunch of really good defensive abilities, so if you need a defensive caster that tends to plink off a lot of stuff, well, there you go. Really, their defensive moves are their main bread and butter there. I don't know, I think they're fun to play with. It's just not really too much to write home about, as far as that's concerned. Most of the lizards are fairly around the middle there. Now, next up, just kind of to continue going down the basic classes that we've clearly overlooked, we have Wizards and Enchantresses. That's going to be... you know what, that's going to be a C tier, I feel. See, they're your main caster class for most of your units. They're the main... well, they're the only one that you're going to get Meditate from, which is pretty much necessary to make casters work. The thing is, even in their best-case scenario, by the end game, there's a lot of stuff, like almost any unit with a shield could potentially just plink off their damage. If you're maybe hopping back and forth between the different caster classes, that'll work pretty well. They've got Extend on them, so that's pretty good in terms of getting some debuffs off where they need to go. They're average, but they're really not going to be... I don't know, maybe they're... Actually, no, you know what? I feel like they're a B tier. They're good. They're not really, like, objectively bad in any way. It's just, they're not really spectacular either. However, if we're talking about disappointing casters, that'll be our happy little Warlocks over here in the E tier. Now, here's the thing. Warlocks are supposed to be the advanced version of Wizards and Enchantresses. They're not, though. Well, I mean, technically speaking, they are. You can make that jump. However, the class by itself is fairly lacking. Like, anything that the Warlock can do well is something that the Wizard or Enchantress can already do themselves, and they probably would be doing those same things just as the Warlock now. The thing is, everything that the Warlock does special, it's just dicey. They've got access to Draconics. On paper, those would be pretty cool. However, at most, well, you're not getting very many casts off that. In fact, you're better off not even using the normal gems that you would use to cast Draconics. You'd be better off just buying a whole bunch of the scrolls to cast them, at which point you really might as well just keep using your original Spellcaster. You've got access to some Golem abilities, if you're using Golems, I guess. And yeah, I guess if you need to use detect traps for all of those no traps that exist in the game, that's a thing you can do. So yeah, I mean that's really about that. They're just not very good. They get access to some unique buffs and things like that. Like, you can make people fly. Great, but by that point you're already in like friggin' Sambronza and stuff like that. I'm sure you've got other stuff that can fly and other means to go about flying. Hopefully you've gotten like flight boots or flight rings or something by that point. So yeah, very disappointing on their own. I guess you could use them as stat bonuses for your existing Enchanter or Wizard or whatever else. Yeah, very disappointing one there. They do have a snazzy bathrobe though, so there's that. Alright, next up we got Tamers. See, this depends. I feel like they're also a B tier. Because here's the thing. Actually, you know what? Let's go... See, they can either be a C tier or a B tier here, I feel. They can do a lot of things, and they can do them well. Not to mention, their buffs on monster units are very good. They tend to be very good support units. You can give them whips, you can give them bows. They're just meant to do plink damage until they can support your monster units. If you rank up those monster supporting skills, they can become insanely good, to the point where you functionally have artillery. So I would kind of figure them less as a tamer, more of an artillery commander. But yeah, I think they're pretty dang good. They're one of the few that make decent use of sidearms, at least if the AI's using them. By the way, I'm calling them sidearms because One Vision changes them to that. The Throne skill. There we go. You know, the thing that's objectively terrible in every way, doesn't have any finishers, and is really expensive to use. That one! Yeah, so just probably give them a short bow or something, but yeah, they're a pretty okay unit. They're good for general harassment and supporting monster units. So speaking of monster units now, See, now, these can potentially be questionable. These are either an A or a C, I feel, as Cockatrices. So, Cockatrices are a bit like, well, we haven't gotten to Griffins yet, but they're fairly fast. They've got a nice stone AoE move. It's not necessarily that reliable, but the only reason that they're in C tier instead of A tier, they're a bit of a pain to get a hold of, and I kind of feel like in general they're a bit worse than Griffins, I feel. Just in general, they're Griffins, but with a less usable stone move. Let's put it that way. They definitely got buffed in the mod. I feel like they're way more dangerous in the mod. Griffins, I personally put in A tier. They're very fast. They can chuck boulders at stuff really fast. And if they end up having issues with health, they can go find a wizard and eat it for health. So, very good, especially when put next to a Tamer. Now, here's the thing, though. They're one of those ones where they're either already dominating the fight or they're already dead. So, yeah, if there's something with Beast Slayer or if there's a whole bunch of archers around, they're probably not going to have a good time. Or they might have already eaten those archers. Like, there's a very fine breakpoint with those. I personally feel like they're very, very good, though. So there's that. Now, speaking of monsters on the opposite side, though, I'm going to put Hydras and Heft here. So, their stats are like a dragon, but worse. They don't move very far. They've got some different breath moves, so that's fun. Yeah, good luck finding one. Most people just hire one to get an ebb, and that's really about it. So, there's that. So yeah, they're a pain to get a hold of, they're a pain to level up. They don't really have good movement options, they're just kind of meh across the board. They've got lower defenses than dragons, so they tend to get ruined pretty easily on the front line. Just annoying to use and get a hold of and whatever else. Which, speaking of dragons, I'm going to say dragons themselves, probably a B tier. They're fairly slow, they're incredibly annoying when the AI uses them, but they've got very high defenses and very decent attack. Their breath moves are nerfed since previous games, like, for example, inflicting misstep instead of stun. But, you know, they can still be pretty alright. In general, I would say their kind of bomb moves, their second-tier moves, are very solid. They're very good as a backline artillery type unit. They're not terribly fast, but they're very tanky. So they're kind of your heavy tank, as it were. If anything has Dragon Slayer, and you actually allowed that thing to get nearby it, well, I mean, that's just entirely on you now, isn't it? Most stuff that has Dragon Slayer will not be using crossbows, which, speaking of, Dragoons can use crossbows. I forgot to mention that earlier. It'll basically one-shot dragons. It's fantastic. Anywho, moving on. Alright, who do we have next here? Rogues. Solid 8, or S tier in my book. You might be saying, why is that not on A? I mean, surely they can't be that busted. Well, they're crazy fast, is the thing. Now, well, okay, I guess this depends on what kind of run you're going for. I guess the argument could be made that they're really not on the same level as these guys, so sure, we'll put them on A tier, actually. But yeah, they're very fast. They can go even faster than they're already very fast. They've got two-handed crossbows, and they're functionally one of the best crossbow users in the game because they get a damage bonus across the board. It's basically like an armor penetration bonus of sorts. If you go into your class menu, basically gives you what their innate attack and defense bonus is at any given point, and these guys, for some reason, have a reasonably high one. Steel is functionally worthless. Your Speed Star, it varies. Like, depending on the build, it might really not do very much for them. In some cases, it might actually end up costing more to use than it actually ends up giving you speed-wise. But just in general, yeah, traps aren't very good, steel isn't very good, but they've got Sporogmos, which is basically an AoE attack against a pretty wide area. Not to mention, defensively and evasively, they're just, I mean, they're pretty stacked as far as that goes. They do their job very well. But yeah, just in general, don't use them as much of a frontliner unless they're running a shield. But they're definitely going to be some of your best crossbow snipers in the game. At least in my opinion. I'm sure some folks might not like them very much. Alright, next up we got priests. So, I feel they're a C tier. They're basically the original Sibyl unit the Cashro comes in with, except, you know, well, they can attack a little bit. If you didn't know, you can give her some extra moves at the start of the game. I mean, she's alright. She's just an improved cleric, pretty much. It's like a cleric that isn't complete hot garbage. Has an action move that can get rid of undead, so that's pretty nice. I mean, really, you're just better off using her as a princess, to be honest. But hey, it's there. Alright. Next up, the beast units that we never ended up getting to. Octopi, easy A tier. Why? Because they are... If the other two were artillery and your heavy tank, this one is functionally your nuke. All you gotta do is just give him Tactician, give him Aqua Rain, and, well, or Poison Rain, sorry. They need Aqua Veil, Poison Rain, and yeah, Tactician. And, yeah, you can charge that up as much as you want. And just go ahead and drop it in huge areas. Aqua Veil lets you use water moves anywhere. It's completely broken. And, yeah, you can just drop insane amounts of damage plus poison in a huge area. It's absolutely broken. The only downside to them is they don't really have any recovery options. But they are absolutely dominant for pretty much any map in the game. Poison somehow affects everything. They can use their water moves anywhere. They don't need to be on water tiles anymore. So that's pretty good. Next up... Alright, so next up we got Golems. I'm going to put them on C. They've got some of the highest defense in the game. I mean, I'm putting all Golems as one thing, because, let's be honest, they are exactly the same freaking thing. And yeah. Now, why C? Well, they do a ton of damage, but their accuracy is just terrible. Their overall health is terrible, but their defense is very, very high. Not to mention they resist just about everything. The thing is, just as soon as you find out that something can pierce through their armor, they've probably already hit the ground. So yeah, they're a little bit unreliable as far as that goes, but they're a fantastic wall most of the time. They can completely lock down an area if you have Gorgon Lock and Expand Force, as well as Rampart Aura. They can just delay movement for like half the freaking map. It's pretty fantastic. But yeah. Oh, by the way, speaking of oddly specific skills and the Warlocks being unbelievably disappointing, they have a melee range move that lets them turn off Gorgon Lock. What are they doing in the front line? And why would you ever put that on one of your slots? It's pretty dumb. Anyway, yeah, so back to Golems. With the AI, they tend to spam a whole bunch of them, and well, with all of their 25%, eventually one of them is going to hit, and eventually one of them is going to hit real hard. So yeah, you might have seen a pretty big skewed opinion of these things being scary. I know personally they killed that solo run more times than I can count. But yeah, just in general, they're good if you've got time to spam, and they're good as a wall. But they're usually not going to be terribly reliable in terms of actually pushing anything. Alright. Next up, we have the Paladin. Now, you might be thinking, they're a pretty good unit. No, I'm putting them in D tier. Yes, he is a good unit. He's an upgraded White Knight, and everything else. You know what would be really nice for a good unit? If you didn't get him about, I don't know, 20 minutes before the end of the game? In like a 400-hour-long game? Okay, it's not actually that long, but, like, legitimately, most folks are about the 80-hour mark before they end up getting this guy, and he's usually just farmed to get ranks of Parry 4, just to go and put them on other people. He's a good class as it is. He's, like, basically a mix of the Divine Knight and regular Knight, and as well as some bits from the White Knight. But yeah, no, you just get him so late, he just kind of sucks, which... By that same token, that's actually where we're going to put Warren as well. The Astromancer is a very good class, arguably the best spellcaster in the game, but you get him so dang late that you're never going to use him. So that's a little bit annoying. Alright, so next up, we need some nicer tiers. So what do we actually have left here that's pretty good? We got White Knights. Those are a very solid A tier. They've got a paralysis move on their frontline hits. Very good. They got their healing abilities. They've even got some speeding up abilities. So, you know, solid unit, just an upgraded knight across the board. Good options. They've got expanded weapon options like spears and two-handers. Spears if you'd like to have extra range, and two-handers if you just feel like ruining your day. So there you go. That's where those are. Let's see, Ranger. I'll probably just put that one in A tier as well. He's just, you know, good across the board. What else? Yeah, I mean, he's got longbows, he's got some sneak moves. It's pretty good. Pretty dang good. One quick moment. Okay. Moving on real quick. So, next up, now if we're talking about a whole bunch of classes that are just kind of weirdly specific, next up we'll go to Swordmasters. Now, that's kind of a hard E tier. The thing is, they use a unique weapon. That's going to be a pain in the neck. Like 2 HKs, nobody else uses them in the game. They're not terribly good. They've got their own set of finishers, which is okay. But just in general, you get them in the mid-game. You're basically starting off at rank 1, like whether it was 2 to 4 somewhere that you probably had by that point. Yeah, you're probably going to be pretty pissed off at starting off from rank 1. The preempt plus bash combo is pretty alright. But yeah, defensively, terrible. Offensively, mediocre. They've got their war dances, which are... like Mass Fortify is okay, Mass Strengthen is okay. The other ones... I mean, you got Mass Charm, that can sometimes work. But yeah, they're just kind of... they're really just more there for the purposes of just having, you know, your token samurai on the team. They're more of a mascot, let's be honest. More than likely, you probably got Hobram and never made another Swordmaster. That's perfectly fair. He's better. I personally like to make Hobram into a Fusilier, but whatever. Alright. So next up, we got Fusiliers, speaking of. I'm going to put them in C tier. You get them very late in the game, but on the plus side, even though they also use a unique weapon, they do train it up fairly fast. They've got the ability to completely ignore terrain. They've got pretty decent attack on those things. They don't have many, well, they don't have any elemental options aside from the Cursed Fusel, which you have to go through Palace of the Dead and specifically make into a particular element to get. So just in general, it's fair to say they don't have elemental options. But, you know, they do their job well enough. They've got high enough attack that it usually doesn't matter. They can usually do at least passable damage. The fact that they can ignore terrain. I've heard them described as an actually balanced archer, so, you know, they do that particular job pretty well. One thing I actually didn't mention up to this point, they've got access to Barricade, as well as Rune Fencers have access to Barricade. It's basically just a tile blocking move, just like the Knights have, their Rampart Aura there. Well, not their Rampart Aura, their Phalanx. No, the Phalanx is what they end up renaming it. Dang it, what the hell do they call it? Rampart Shadow, there we go. Or the, you know, the pumpkins. I actually forgot the pumpkin men here. They're technically familiars, or whatever. The pumpkin heads are basically familiars. They get access to pumpkin-flavored moves. But yeah, they have a tile blocking move. They're very situational. Barricade is just kind of like a cheap version of it, with no Rampart Aura attached. There's certain situations where it can be useful. You probably won't ever really want to keep it on the team, but it's there if that's your thing. You can use it to set up auto-training loops if you weren't aware of that, wherein you basically barricade 2 units, have everyone else evacuate using gemstones, and yeah, you just have them beat each other senseless until they usually master it and end up killing the other guy. Usually you would just go and, let's say, take a level 30, bring them into a fight, win the entire fight, leave 1 cleric that's able to heal very reliably, and say you wanted to train up cudgels, so you'd give them a Sybil Staff, you just have them beat that poor bastard for several hours on end. You just leave your game running and walk away. Just leave it auto-attacking. And, yeah, as long as they have some means to heal themselves, then you can just auto-train that thing until rank 8 or until the other guy dies. It's very situational, but it's there. Barricade's the cheapest and simplest way to get that done. Alright, so next up on the list, we've got Shamans, another solid A tier. They're they've got access to most of the elemental options. They've got the ability to boost their attack power of those moves by 50%. They've also got one of the most worthless abilities in the game to actually tell what the weather's like, because when you unlock Shamans, your map automatically does that, so it's weird that they have that option. But yeah, as soon as you unlock Shamans, if you do use your overhead map, it tells you, hey, the prevailing element is blah blah blah, and now you know. But anywho, solid attacking class. I mean, you get 4 of them. Do with that as you will. Next up, in terms of classes, see, I want to put Deneb as, well... Okay, you know what? Actually, she goes to A tier, Shamans go to B, I feel. Reason being, just the wiki, apparently, as it's pronounced. I tried looking up looking up whether there's any pronunciation of her class. It's either wiki or wish or wick or witch, just spelled weird, but either way, it's there. She basically gets the same thing as Shamans, except it's a 50% boost to everything, so yeah. She gets a boost to accuracy as well as attack. Very solid class. She is a bit... Actually, you know what? No. Let's swap that around. She goes down to B tier because she is a massive pain in the neck to get a hold of. So there we go. We'll pop that particular one down there. Alright, one random package delivery later. Let's go ahead and wrap this up. So, last few here. In terms of kind of semi-unique, semi-disappointing classes, I personally like to put Varden down on the bottom here. Usually, you're better off turning him into an archer or something along those lines if you're going to play optimally, or, you know, a warrior if you're looking for something fun. See, the Varden has a weird downside that it doesn't tell you about, in which, for some reason, their movement cost is unusually high. Now, I could be wrong on this. I don't remember the math exactly, but I believe his movement was like 6 RT per tile or something like that. Not to mention his initial setup of short bow and axe is, well, it's very easy to pick. You pick the one that actually does damage, so you go with short bow. So yeah, weird class. Weirdly enough, it's a reference to OB64 with the whole axe setup, but yeah, just in general, you're usually better off switching him to anything else and using the Varden as free experience. You can change others to that class as well, but I'm really not sure why you would. Like, it's really nothing special. It's a flying class that specializes in light weapons for the most part. I believe it can actually use heavy crossbows, so you're usually better off just going with something like that, but at that point you really might as well just go with archers, you know? I've never really seen too much of a case where I didn't switch them to something else if I actually cared about using something else. Alright, next up, another F-tier class is going to be the Songstress, speaking of birdies. So, it's almost like they made this class as a joke, because they took the worst of everything you could possibly have the worst of and just made it into one class. Would you like to have no armor options? Fantastic. Would you like to have a unique weapon that's a complete pain in the anus to get? Awesome. Would you like to have a spell list that is almost entirely worthless? Nice. And would you like to have skills that are sort of okay? Yeah. Oh, and by the way, would you like them to show up only in the end game? Like literally, they show up as the first unit you get after beating Coda, or beating the first Coda. So you got a boss fight to get them, you got to beat the entire game to get them, and you have to then go get all of their abilities from either Deneb's Chop or Sanbronza, as well as all of their weapons. Half of, well, not even half of, most of which are craftables. Ironically, the easiest weapons of theirs to get is the cursed version. Actually, well, no. I mean, if you're already at that point in the game, or the earliest you can get is the cursed version. Technically the easiest is going to be the first one in the Floating Ruins, that kind of, it's like Pandaria or whatever it's called, the kind of tambourine-looking thing. Usually you end up getting one of those by accident. But yeah, especially considering the fact that she can become a shaman, yeah, the Songstress is pretty, garbage. Like, she can become an archer, she can become a shaman, like, there's so many better options for her. So yeah, a definite hard nope on that one. Next we've got an E tier with Necromancers. I feel like they'd be an F tier, if not for the fact that they could reanimate zombies, and it's the only way you can really make a viable zombie setup. like, the zombies themselves are pretty cool. They've got some interesting offensive moves. They've got a interesting little reagent type of system going on. Like, they're a warlock, but more interesting. In fact, you know what? Let's put them in D tier, just to put them above the warlock, because that's just the warlock deserves to be stepped on. All right, next we got the Lord. See, it's arguable they're an S tier. I personally view them as a B tier. And here's my logic behind that. They are very locked into a very boring setup. They're pretty much locked into going Aug Light and going for like a Brynhildr sword and board setup. They're very good at doing that. It's unbelievably dull, though, and I really hate using that build. So, for example, first thing I did when doing One Vision was create a like a double light spear build, or, you know, in the vanilla game, going for like dual axes or something like that, or, you know, going for spear and draconic or something. There's like most of the interesting stuff you can do with Lord. They've got the stats to back up most of it, but you just know how suboptimal it is compared to the Divine setup. It's kind of a similar problem to what Valkyries have, where it's just like they have one thing that they need to go for, and he's kind of completely set up for that Boy Scout thing. Now, the reason for this, and the fact that, and the reason for some of their weird limitations in terms of gear, is because of a thing in the game where you cannot get a skill past rank 12. So it seems like most of their equipment was specifically set up, since they can get access to almost everything. It seems like it was almost tailor-made to be able to only get certain augments from certain places in order to not break the game. So, yeah, it's just like, it feels like every time you want to build something creative with the Lord, well, then suddenly they're like, oh, you want to have some fun with the Lord? Well, you're gonna go embrace some religion, go go get some Jesus in your setup, because you need all the light over here. So, I personally just find that incredibly frustrating. Arguably, you could say stat and availability-wise, it should be an S tier. I personally just don't like using it, so, like I said, it's all based on personal opinion, so here it is in B. Next up, we got Liches. Yeah, screw it, that gets an F tier, I don't care. Their Knight of Lotus version was disgusting and overpowered and amazing. This version is low on defense, low on speed, low on any interesting skills, and their spell availability is just anything that sounds edgy and evil. I mean, sure, their stats are okay. One Vision at least gave them the ability to teleport. This is just, Not to mention you have to get a particular item and bring it to a particular floor in order to have anyone even transform into it, so screw that. And then lastly, we have the Buccaneer. I feel like that's a B tier. They're a pretty solid one-on-one fighter. They've got an interesting like pistol and sword setup. You can actually have Denim and where's my White Knights? Actually, wait, yeah, I did cover White Knights. You can have Denim and what's his face? Birdman. Why am I forgetting Canopus? How do I forget Canopus? You can have both of them become Buccaneers. In fact, to have a Fusilier or to have a to even use the pistol and sword setup on Canopus is a gigantic pain in the neck, because you basically have to go through this whole setup involving the Ogre Blade and involving a few casualties and some body swaps, and oh boy, it's a mess and a half. But eventually, if you can get a dead Birdman that happens to have Fusils on him, it's like basically you have to take a generic human, have them body swap with a Birdman, or a Fusilier, have them transform into like Terronite or something, of a high enough level to use the Ogre Blade, then use Body Swap on a Birdman, let the Birdman die, then have Canopus eat that Birdman, and now he's figured out how a gun works. So, yeah. Ironically, despite Canopus's class being down here in the E tier, like, he himself would be easy S tier over here. If there was an S plus tier, he'd probably be about there. But yeah, the Buccaneer is pretty good. He's got a bunch of Lizard Man moves. He's got most of the fun stuff from the Lizard classes that he can do, as well as a few other little quirks. You know, general pirate type of setup. Not to mention, if you actually do manage to get him, I will say his side quest is a bit of a pain in the neck. In fact, screw it. That side quest is such a pain in the neck, I almost want to put him in D tier. Alright, whatever. You know what? He's too cool. He gets to stay in B tier. He gets some of the best dialogue. So we'll put him there. And yeah, that's about that. So that is the vanilla classes, by and large, unless I'm forgetting something. So thank you guys for showing up and looking over this thing. Curious to see the angry comments over some of these classes. I guarantee there'll be at least a few people like, oh no, clerics are actually good, you complete moron. I know. Everything in this game can be good. Let me put that out there. Every single class can be good. Except for maybe Terronites. They specifically, I've seen several guys that specifically say you have to give them the Ogre Blade and the Fire Crest, and then they'll be good. Or the Ogre setup, sorry. The entire Ogre set. So, you know, there's that. Not to mention a few of these just come with recovery time bonuses that are too easy to get completely broken. Like especially Ozma is, I believe, the fastest unit in the game, despite the fact that she's a tank and also hits like, I don't know, hits like a freaking meteor. But either way, that's that. You guys have a good one. Let me know what you think, and I will be making more of these for the rest of the games in the series as time goes on. You guys have a good one. Take care. Bye.